smaller companies, even some enterprises, it's more of it's got the perception of being more of a government issue, a military issue, defense industrial base. And for the most part, while that's true, there is a trickle down. We're seeing a lot of the tactics, a lot of the procedures that these APT groups are using are starting to move into the enterprise as these 0 days get patched and these exploits become commodity and rolled into exploit kits. They start to be used in cybercrime operations, and they start to be used in identity fraud and banking fraud operations. So there is a trickle down, a top down thing, and you know, today's kind of 0 day APT thing might be tomorrow's attack against your company. So it's definitely worth paying attention, getting kind of an initial foothold on this stuff. So APT, the Advanced Persistent Threat. There are a lot of common characteristics to some of these attacks. And for the most part, APT used to kind of equal China. Every time you hear about one of these attacks, it was China, China, China. And yeah, for the most part, it seems to be that way if you pay attention to the headlines. But rest assured, it's happening in the U.S., it's happening in Russia, it's happening in any nation with some advanced capabilities. Iran, everybody's using their own capabilities to spy over the internet. This is basically where espionage is happening. It's happening on a corporate level. I mean, just ask Sony and the damage and the reputation and the brand damage there. It's happening against military institutions, defense industrial base, government. And this is basically kind of the checklist of these guys, kind of the basics, how they operate. Identify the target. These attacks are obviously very targeted. That's the nature of them. And you'd be surprised how much time they spend building a profile of your company. They will check everything, LinkedIn profiles, engineering forums, Twitter accounts. They will try to mine every bit of intelligence that they can on your company, on specific people in your companies, what kind of servers you guys are using. Any bit of information can help them craft an exploit, build a campaign against your company. Infect the machine. Obviously, that's their initial foothold into a company. How are they doing it? Phishing attacks. All of that initial kind of social engineering that's happening goes into a phishing attack. That's kind of the first move for these guys, is to build trust, spoof an email from somebody that you might know, somebody inside your company, your HR, some kind of third-party provider that you guys work with on an everyday basis. You might get an email from them that you're likely to open, and if there's a link in there, maybe you'll trust it, and that link, if it's coming from an attacker, is obviously going to send you to a website that they're controlling, probably drop an exploit against the vulnerability on your machine, and you're owned. That initial foothold enables them to move laterally within the network. They're looking for credentials. They're looking for legitimate credentials. And the reason is, once they have legitimate credentials, they become you. They become a legitimate insider. And you may not have access to the database that they want. It may be way down there, maybe 20 hops down the network, but they can use your credentials, your network shares, your access to move from point to point, and eventually, if they're good enough, and most of these guys are, they will hit what they want. It's super important for them to stay stealthy, stay under the covers. They want to be quiet. They want persistence. That's the P part of APT, persistence, which means staying on machines, staying quiet, not getting detected, using tactics that will elude your intrusion prevention, elude antivirus. And what are they after? They're after your data. They're after intellectual property first and foremost. This stuff has value. You know, it's not out of the question to see some project that some company is working on today show up 6 months ahead of your release in China or something. They're growing their economy in a big way because of APTs, stealing a lot of this important data. They're going after the files stored on your systems, financial data, credentials. Credentials have an extreme value to these guys. It's what they're all about. It gives them that initial foothold. So it's definitely a malware problem. It all starts with malware. Obviously, it's their main means of operation. The spear phishing campaigns, as I said, that these messages are extremely crafted and targeted for individuals in your company or towards your company. They either contain an attachment, an Office document that's rigged with some kind of exploit, or there's a link in that message that'll send you to a website that'll try and exploit some vulnerability on your machine. 0 days. Obviously, the big kind of high-profile news that we write about, 0-day vulnerabilities, previously unreported vulnerabilities that somebody has an exploit for. These things are extremely valuable. And a lot of I'm going to go through about 4 or 5 specific APT campaigns in this presentation, and you'll notice how rare it is even for these guys to burn a 0-day in one of these attacks, because once that 0-day gets discovered, it'll eventually get patched, and it's of no use to them anymore. They're after commodity exploits. They're looking for the third-party stuff, Java, Adobe vulnerabilities, Microsoft Office stuff that you haven't patched, operating systems that that are not up to proper patch levels, forgotten test servers that hasn't been patched in a couple of years. This is what they're counting on. They're counting on the fact that you guys are swamped every day putting out 100 fires, and that maybe your patching process isn't where it should be. And these vulnerabilities, these exploits still work. There are campaigns today that we're researching, that we report on, that are using exploits for vulnerabilities that are 2, 3, 5 years old sometimes. So there are open machines out there. That's how these guys are taking advantage of it. And if you hear them burning a 0-day in a campaign, it's a really big deal. The last line there, the remote access Trojans, the rootkits, the data exfiltration tools, these are all standard kinds of malware, standard kinds of attacks that these guys use to open backdoors, to move data off of machines. Rootkits give them that persistence that they're inside the machine. A lot of these rootkits will survive a reboot or reformatting. It's really nasty stuff, and these guys are super smart and well-resourced, and you guys are kind of caught in the crossfire, unfortunately. Just kind of just a few numbers in terms of some of the malware and some of the methods used in APT-related incidents. Obviously, there's malware in just almost 100% of these cases. Phishing in about half. I think that's understated a little bit. I would think it's a little higher than that. But regardless, you get a sense there of how these guys are getting on machines. And you see down the bottom the botnets, the DDoS. That's more in the cybercrime realm. It's not necessarily used in espionage, but even to some degree, these guys are making use of those kinds of tactics. So here's an interesting kind of timeline of some high-profile APT attacks. Starting on the far left with Stuxnet, it's kind of the big one that everybody's probably familiar with. It was a joint attack against Iran's nuclear program. It was spread over USB sticks in order to beat some air-gapped machines that weren't connected to a network, machines that weren't exposed to the internet, still got popped. A bunch of 0 days used in Stuxnet. A lot of these campaigns have some ties, have some connections. Flame and Stuxnet and Mini Flame down the bottom there in 2012, all are kind of cousins, all either developed by the same group, or these groups are sharing code, sharing tactics. Dooku, Red October have Russian origins. A couple of those down the bottom, Net Traveler and Ice Fog, are two of the campaigns I'm going to talk about today. They've kind of been nailed down as Chinese operations. Stuxnet, Reagan, another one, Equation Group, could be U.S. The attribution is super hard, but there are a lot of dots that can be connected. And eventually, the Stuxnet, for example, used an LNK vulnerability that I'm going to go through in a few slides. It just showed up again a couple of weeks ago. It turns out that the original patch that Microsoft had sent out in 2012 for this vulnerability for Stuxnet was incomplete, and all those machines were exposed for almost 5 years. So there's a trickle down, and this stuff affects you eventually, even though you might not be the initial target. So the landscape, who are these people? So this pyramid kind of paints a pretty good picture. Down the bottom, cybercrime. One thing in common is the organization, the resources behind all of these groups and all of these kinds of attacks. Cybercrime, everybody's familiar with it. Identity theft, banking fraud, banking Trojans. Very organized. These guys run it like an enterprise. We've heard cases of, organization within these criminal groups having an executive branch kind of thing. They outsource. They'll hire developers to build different parts of these campaigns, and you over here will build one thing, and you over here will build something else, and these guys never talk. They don't know what they're building it for, but there's a central organization paying for this, organizing the campaign, picking the targets, and that's at the criminal level. As it goes up the chain, it gets much more complex, much more sophisticated. The mercenaries aspect to this, there are guns for hire out there. You can go on some of these black hat forums, find people who are selling botnets, selling Trojans. You can lease botnets. You can lease banking Trojans. There are service providers out there on the underground that will manage a campaign for you. And that's all kind of in the criminal realm of this. If you get to the top of that pyramid, that's the elite, the best of the best, the state hackers. That's where all the money is. That's where all the resourcing is. And that's where the most dangerous kinds of attacks and campaigns are happening. They're funded by governments. There's a lot of money behind it, a lot of expertise. The NSA, a lot of stuff came out in the Snowden documents. As we've all been living with that for now almost 2 years. Those documents paint a pretty good picture of their capabilities, what they're after, the breadth of surveillance, not just surveillance, the way that they've kind of injected themselves into products with backdoors. They've kind of backdoored some popular cryptography and encryption standards. There really isn't any stone that they haven't unturned to get at what they want in terms of surveillance, in terms of espionage. And, they're spies. It's what they do. So, like I said, I'm going to go through a few of these APT campaigns, just provide some context and some specifics as to how these guys behave and what they're after. This one goes back to about 2004. It's called Net Traveler. And I've got this tail of the tape slide kind of for every one of these campaigns, so you can check out some of the targets, some of the victims, some of the industries that they're after. This was kind of, so this was announced in June 2013, again, almost 2 years ago, but it's about a decade old. And this was kind of fascinating. Our researchers at Kaspersky were able to kind of tie these guys to China. They saw a lot of overlap with some older espionage campaigns that kind of even predate Stuxnet. You guys remember Titan Rain from about 10 years ago, and GhostNet. These were kind of pretty big campaigns going after military secrets, U.S. military secrets, attacking the government, defense industrial base. A lot of the big contractors were kind of in the crosshairs with these two guys, with these two campaigns. And you get a sense of some of the industries that are targeted here. And again, it may not be the industry sitting in this room, but a lot of their tactics, a lot of their malware, a lot of the way they approach these campaigns, it's a copycat industry out there in the underground, and eventually it will come down to, impacting enterprises and mid-market companies, smaller companies. Specifically, Net Traveler, actually, let me back that up. Just staying with Titan Rain for a second, going after Lockheed Martin, Sandia National Labs, NASA, some huge organizations, and the ultimate target is classified military information. GhostNet, similar operation, but different targets, going after embassies, going after ambassadors, trying to pinpoint the data on those machines. Both of those campaigns were linked to China, not only by us, by some research organizations. I want to give some love to Citizen Lab up in Toronto. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of them. They do a lot of good work on these APT campaigns, on some of these malware campaigns that are targeting activist groups, folks that have been exiled from some rough parts of the world, and they uncover some of the attacks going on against these people. So they publish a lot of work, and it's worth checking out. Citizen Lab in Toronto. So in addition, as I mentioned, in addition to military and government targets, sometimes these activist groups, these APT groups, are going after activists like Tibetan refugees and activists that have been exiled from China. They go after influential people in those communities, and they target them with malware, try to monitor their communication. And I remember early last year reporting on one of these campaigns. It was attributed to China going after some of these Tibetan activists. And it's not just espionage for intelligence sake. It's not just watching their communication and trying to figure out how they're organizing their movements. They're looking for their physical location now. They've planted some Android malware. They trick some of these people through phishing emails to download some malicious Android app that would monitor the physical location based on cell tower information. So you're talking about physical safety at risk here as well, not just communication and spying for intelligence. So it's some scary stuff. So just to go back to NetTraveler for a second, some of the targets are pretty comprehensive with this campaign. Our researchers seem to think that these guys behind NetTraveler were also either behind GhostNet and Titan Rain, or they were sharing code pretty intimately. There was a couple of backdoors that were used in all three of these campaigns that were pretty similar. There's a lot of code sharing, a lot of the tactics going after Office, Microsoft Documents, things like that, that seem to correspond across all three of these campaigns. And these campaigns move pretty quickly. I mean, within 6 months of discovering NetTraveler, and it was primarily a Windows operation at that time, we found a variant that had already incorporated some Java exploits for some vulnerabilities that have been patched fairly recently. So these platforms are very flexible. They're architected so that they can move quickly. They can move in a lot of new plugins. NetTraveler, for example, could even be adjusted to go after engineering documents if they were targeting manufacturing outlets. They could steal CAD documents, look for CAD files, things like that. So, and again, that first step is that phishing attack. But we're also seeing kind of a move toward watering hole attacks. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this concept of a watering hole attack. There's some of the victims there for NetTraveler, some of the countries. But basically, a watering hole attack saves them the trouble of attacking individual companies, attacking companies or targets individually. So what they'll do is they'll target a website or some kind of online resource that their target will frequent. For example, if they're after an ambassador or an embassy employee of some kind, and there's a think tank website that's a good resource for a lot of embassies, they'll look for vulnerabilities on that website, and they'll try and drop an exploit there. And again, instead of targeting everyone in this room individually, if you all go to the same website, they'll go to that website, try to infect it, and try to get your machine that way. So a lot of flexibility, a lot of maneuvering on this. These guys are never sit still. You can see a lot of the victims by sector there, primarily government down the bottom there, and it's a big slice of the pie. Ice Fog, I love these names. I don't know, a lot of these names come out of the code. Find little snippets of code, these notes that these guys leave each other. But this one's kind of unique. I remember when I said that these persistence is kind of one of the main goals of these guys. They want to stay on machines, and they want to stay there quietly, and they want to stay there for a long time. Ice Fog was completely opposite here. This is where the mercenary part on that pyramid comes in. Whoever was running this campaign was doing a lot of quick hit APT style attacks, and definitely hiring this stuff out. They weren't looking for long-term persistence inside these networks they were infecting. Once they had whatever they needed from a victim, they got off the machine. They cleaned up their tracks and they moved on. These were not long-term campaigns, but they were very effective. Again, primarily a Windows-based campaign, as you can see here, but right in the middle, something new that we had spotted. There was a backdoor built specifically for Apple machines for OS X. And our researchers figured it was a beta because it never popped up again. But, you know, again, testing the waters, trying to infect Apple machines as well. Obviously, Windows is still the primary operating system out there, but with mobile, with Apple, they're always trying new techniques. So just a few details on IceFog. They establish a backdoor, just like all of these campaigns do. They drop a number of tools on the machine, not just Windows. They're looking for third-party vulnerabilities. A lot of the targets were in Asia, so a lot of the phishing campaigns very targeted, very precise towards specific topics, issues in that region. These guys were going after the supply chain as well as military targets. They were going after telecoms. They were going after defense contractors. They were going after media companies in Asia. So very comprehensive, just mining data, stealing information from the various sources that they're going after. And again, much like NetTraveler, this campaign evolved quickly too. Within 6 months, we saw attacks against 3 U.S. oil companies. So we ran a sinkhole against some of their command and control domains. We found a lot of this data out. We found that they were targeting Java as well. And they kind of went quiet, resurfaced again with some attacks against the U.S. companies. And if just to go back to another point here, you notice that I haven't mentioned 0 days in a while. These, again, a lot of these are just commodity exploits going after unpatched systems, versions of Flash, versions of Java that are out of date, Windows machines that might not be up to patch levels, old versions of Internet Explorer. I mean, we've seen campaigns where these guys are successfully exploiting people using IE7, IE8, stuff that should have been wiped out long ago. So again, the 0 days are really valuable, and these guys aren't going to burn them if they don't have to. So there's just a look at some of the specific targets, some of the defense contractors in Asia, some of the telecoms. So Reagan, this was disclosed this year in January. And if you recall, just going back to that timeline of attacks, Dooku, Flame, Stuxnet, those guys, Reagan seems to predate them. And it seems to be along that Stuxnet family as well. Unlike IceFog, this platform, and this is a complete espionage platform. This is not just a series of one-off attacks, but this is a complete platform that's dropped onto machines. This was built for persistence. This was built for high-value targets. This was built for important people. And it's a complete, like I said, it definitely upped the spy game. It's a complete attack profile platform. And again, going after credentials, going after communication. One thing that these guys went after too that was a little different. There's some more notes there. They went after GSM and GSM operators and telecom operators. This was kind of a new twist for us. GSM, if you're not familiar, it's short for the Global System for Mobile Communications. It's kind of the default standard for mobile networks around the world, primarily in Europe and Asia. I don't think the US is on GSM entirely. These guys were able to steal credentials from an internal GSM base controller inside one of these telecommunications companies. What this did was it gave them access to cells in that network. So they could see all kinds of traffic. They could monitor phone calls. They could grab anything that they wanted. They could allocate resources. They could transfer data from one cell to servers that they controlled. A very comprehensive attack. Primarily a Windows-based attack. We found it on 27 organizations in 14 countries. So really not very widespread. Hand-picked targets. Again, 27 companies and 14 organizations. And even went after a specific cryptographer in Belgium. I'm not even going to try and pronounce his name, but he was one of the targets. They got his computer, and he I forget how we detected it, but just the level of targeting is really noteworthy here. And then you can see kind of a list of some of the victims in some of the countries that were affected. We found a lot of backdoors. A lot of these machines were backdoored, communicating with attack servers. A lot of data moving off of these machines. Another interesting part about Reagan, It's dropped in stages, and one of the modules that we found in one of the early stages of the attack was signed with a phony digital certificate from Microsoft. So trying to give it some credibility there. That's another interesting aspect to this. Shortly after Reagan was disclosed, researchers in a few areas made the connection, found something similar to some details in the Snowden documents. Again, attribution being what it is, it's difficult. A lot of these guys share code and capabilities, but I think you can tell by the map who's not being attacked there, where Reagan might be coming from. There's a piece of malware called QWERTY, K-W-E-R-T-Y, like the keyboard. It's basically a keylogger, and that's part of the Reagan platform. There's a description of a similar keylogger in one of the Snowden documents that basically matches QWERTY word for word. So just an interesting kind of side note as to who might be behind Reagan, but it's been around for a while. It's being used effectively, and it's being used against a lot of targets. So it's my last one of these that I want to go through is the equation group. So I don't know if you guys have heard about this. It's fairly new in terms of being public, but it has been in operation since about 2001. Some compile dates in the code go back to 96, but safe bet is it goes back to at least 2001. Again, another one of these complete espionage platforms. We heard about Reagan. We were kind of blown away about how comprehensive it was and all the capabilities. This one kind of takes the cake, though. Again, complete platform, 0 days. This one's not fooling around. They're using 0 days. In addition to the commodity exploits, has a huge persistence module in it. So basically, there's a module in this, and I'll go through, that will hook into the firmware on a machine and reprogram it and stay quiet, and it's pretty much impossible to get rid of this thing. It's basically take a hammer to your hard drive. It's over if you find this stuff on your machine. A couple of the 0 days predate Stuxnet attacks. One of the 0 days, and I'll go through it, was used in Stuxnet, also used by this group. Just very comprehensive. It was disclosed in February. We found victims in a number of countries, including Russia, Syria, Iran, Pakistan, China, Afghanistan, India, etc. It's used to steal important data from important people. Kind of hard to see. I don't know if you guys are going to get a copy of the slides, but it's a pretty good look at the malware. And all these reports are all available on our website, so you can download them, take a look. They're like 80, 90 pages in some cases. So if you're ever bored and want to read about this stuff, I recommend it. Just to go through some of the components of the equation group, there's a toolkit in there, self-propagating worm, that moves over USB sticks, very Stuxnet-like, in order to infect air-gapped machines, infect these machines that are not connected to the internet, are not supposed to be networked, but they still have important stuff on there that's worth looking at. This validator module, this is fascinating. Basically, this is the first thing that this equation platform drops on your machine, and it kind of goes through your machine, looks in your files, and figures out, are you interesting enough? Do I want to steal the stuff that's on your machine? If yes, you get these next two platforms. If not, it's done. It's over. It's a validator module. I think it was first time I had heard about anything like that. These two platforms, Equation Drug and Grayfish, they're kind of the big ones. Basically, these are the malware modules. Equation Drug is the older one. It's been replaced since by Grayfish. These guys kind of went off the radar in 2013, 2014. So chances are Grayfish has been replaced by now. And when you start hearing about some of the capabilities of this, you can imagine what they have now. Just to go over the link between Stuxnet and Equation, there was one vulnerability. I mentioned it earlier. There's LNK vulnerability. Basically, LNK files, as I understand them, they define shortcuts to files or directories. So basically, if they can exploit the vulnerability in this, place one of these malicious shortcuts, one of these malicious LNK files inside a directory, all you have to do is visit that directory, and you're infected with this equation malware. Again, so this is especially effective if you can get it on a USB, get somebody to insert the USB into a machine. It'll beat air gap defenses and so forth. So another weird aspect of this too, just to show kind of the lengths that these guys will go to. There was a technology conference in Houston a few years back. Whoever's behind Equation managed to get into the manufacturing of the conference CDs. You know, the CDs you get with the programs and the presentations and everything. And they managed to get the malware onto the CD so that basically whoever these 200 important people were at this technology conference, once they popped the CD or the USB into their machine, and yeah, they would get the presentation, but they would also get this malware. So they were targeting people at this conference, and this is how we first became aware of the malware. Here was a slip. So Equation Drug and Grayfish were kind of the other malware modules. A lot of the usual capabilities, you know, primarily data stealing. This module, this generic NLS 933W.dll, this library, this is the persistence module I was talking about, and I spent quite a bit of time with one of our researchers who found it and who went through it. And this guy is a very stoic dude, and he's not given to hyperbole. He calls this thing the ultimate persistence module. Okay, this thing will survive OS reinstalls. It'll survive disk formatting. It overwrites firmware on your machine with a custom payload. It gives you eternal persistence on a machine. It's impossible to detect. The neat thing of this thing, I mean, you know, neat from a kind of gee whiz point of view, this module, once it locks itself into your firmware, into the guts of your machine, it builds a hidden storage partition. So as these guys are stealing data, they're not moving it directly off the machine. They're encrypting it, and they're hiding it in this particular partition that the malware creates on your hard drive, on your hardware. It's kept there, it's encrypted, and then it's eventually shipped off when it's safe. There's only one way that they could do this because of the complexity of the hardware and the firmware that's used. I don't know if you can see that on the screen, but if you see some of the names that popped up, this is actual code from that module. You'll see Samsung, Hitachi, Seagate. They had, and this is all proprietary stuff, they had the hardware specs for every one of these manufacturers in order to build this module. How'd they do it? Well, they either had an insider, they were able to steal these documents, they had the proprietary stuff in order to interact with the firmware. So they had an insider who stole them, or they infected these vendors individually with malware, phishing, and interdicted themselves that way. Just goes to show you just some context on the resources and the targets that they're going after. This module in particular was only dropped a half dozen times or so. It was not used every time Equation was deployed. So they were very specific about when they dropped it. There's 0 days when they drop these particular modules. So they're very protective of this, and they're very selective as to who gets them. And then you'll see another map of victims worldwide, and it's pretty extensive. So just kind of a couple of slides to wrap up. Consequences for you. Downtime, business interruption. Obviously, eventually this stuff will trickle down. Eventually this stuff will get folded into exploit kits, and you've got to be aware of it. You know, all of you have confidential, sensitive information you don't want out there in the public. Intellectual property. I mean, if you guys are manufacturers of, you know, anything, new pharmaceuticals, manufacturers, engineering, you don't want your blueprints, you don't want your formulas out there to the highest bidder, because that's what's happening. A lot of it's getting lost to the highest bidder out there in the underground. Data breaches. If you're breached, you have to disclose, and you have to pay for credit monitoring, and you have to pay for a lot of cleanup costs, and it's expensive. Damage to software. We've heard some attacks where machines are bricked with wiper software. It basically overwrites the master boot record, and you're left with just a paperweight for a workstation. And obviously, a lot of costs there. Reputation damage. It's really hard to quantify what these attacks will do to you in terms of, a number value on your reputation, but a couple of institutes try to do it, break down the costs in terms of technical support, lost productivity, business disruption. These are big numbers, and if you're a smaller company, it's really hard to swallow a $9.4 million bill on one of these things. So that's what I have. Thank you for listening. I can take a couple of questions if we have time. That's my contact information. Feel free to drop me a line. Yes. I don't believe that they're part of this. No, I don't believe that they were included. Yeah, right. Exactly. So the comment was that a lot of the firmware is signed, it's digitally signed, so it makes these attacks kind of difficult, so that's correct. Any other questions? All right, thank you.